I am Katie Cox. I'm the Executive Director of Kaniksu Land Trust, and I'm excited to have you all here today for a community conversation on community land trusts. I'm going to let most of the introductions come from Lisa Gerber, who's going to be our facilitator, but I really want to take at least a moment here to recognize the Bonner County Human Rights Task Force, who gave a grant so that we could have this conversation together today and helped to bring Michael here to town and helped to coordinate all of this. I also want to acknowledge Carol Curtis, who did a lot of the work in bringing this session here together. I also want to acknowledge our partners with KLT, Project 7B, and Susan Drumheller. So thank you, Project 7B, for being interested in this conversation, because I think it's going to be a really good conversation today. I look forward to what we're going to listen to, what we're all going to learn about, and I being one of those people, I think there's going to be a lot to learn today, and then what we're going to work on together. So afterwards, we're going to do some facilitation and led by Liz Wargo, and so I look forward to having all of us heads down trying to figure out some of these challenges that we're facing here in our beautiful, beautiful town. So with that, I'm going to introduce Lisa Gerber. Lisa is a story strategist and communications expert who works with purpose-driven leaders and organizations to help them articulate their ideas so they can connect with the communities they serve and influence action. From land conservation, wilderness education, animal welfare, to education and health and wellness, Lisa has helped leaders and organizations shape perception and motivate behaviors so that they can transform, elevate the positioning, and debunk misperceptions about their organizations. She volunteers as Director of Strategy for the nonprofit Their Story is Our Story, and wrote a book titled From So What to So Funded, and stays busy delivering programs, speaking at conferences, and interviewing fascinating nonprofit leaders on her podcast, Breaking Trails. So that is Lisa. Lisa's a powerhouse. She's an amazing, thoughtful leader in our community. I hope most of you have had a chance to meet Lisa, and if you haven't listened to her podcast, turn to her podcast, because she's interviewing some really thoughtful guests lately, especially in the realm of things that we're dealing with here in Bonner County and growth and the impacts that has on us as people and the balance of people and the landscape. So with that, I'll give it over to Lisa.
Thank you so much. So nice. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Man, it is so great to see this room full. We had no idea what to expect today. It turns out when you live in a community that's super desirable and beautiful, such as ours, affordable housing and workforce housing becomes a real issue. So I'm glad to gather today and talk about solutions. I'm going to introduce the three panelists in just a moment, but just want to run through what we're going to do in the next couple of hours. So we will talk about community land trusts as one solution to the workforce housing shortage, and talk about ideas and learn together. I'm very excited to learn from these three about how it works on a national level and how it can work here locally. Then we're going to, after about an hour, break into roundtable discussions that will be led by Liz Wargo, who is a University of U of I professor, and going to help us integrate the topics, the ideas that we talk about into actions and next steps that make sense for our community. So with that, let me start by introducing who we have today. Most of you know Katie Cox, also a powerhouse in this community, Executive Director of Kaniksu Land Trust. She has a background in architecture and education, and she has beautifully married that work into conservation and her love of this place and the state of Idaho. We also have Erik Brubaker. What was your name again? Erik Brubaker. He is formerly the planning director of Ponderay. He now holds the title of Director of Community Development and Parks, and is dedicating a lot of his work right now to the Front Yard Project, which is to provide 2 miles of waterfront access to our community along the Ponderay Bay Trail. Our esteemed guest today is Michael Brown. We're using really big language today.
I've never heard that word.
Really? He's a partner at Burlington Associates in Community Development and is based in the Bozeman office. He has nearly 40 years of experience in community development, housing development, advocacy, and organizational development, particularly with community land trusts and other shared equity strategies. He has served as the first executive director of the Woodland Community Land Trust in Clairfield, Tennessee, one of the first CLTs operating in the US. So in the past 15 years, Michael has provided on-site technical assistance to establish and build the capacity of new and existing CLTs, services ranging from feasibility analysis and business planning to program implementation and evaluation, and to build support for CLTs from their public and private sector partners. So that's the short story is he's got a lot of experience in CLTs, and we get to draw from that today. And you'll please add anything that I missed during our discussions. So what I would love to do is start with you, Katie, and I would like to sort of lay some context for what's going on in our local and the local situation and how we got to where we are today and just what the issue is.
Oh. I have a loud voice.
But not that loud. So part of what began this conversation, as you all know, I mean, I'm not one to just say what I'm seeing, I think we're all seeing it, is that as Sandpoint and our towns around us are so desirable, we're getting an influx of individuals moving here, housing prices are rising, housing stock is decreasing. And in response to that, there's been a number of initiatives that have started up to try to combat some of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing, and some conversations that have started up. Shelby, with Mayor of Sandpoint, who is here today. I've lost him, I'm short. There we go, there's Shelby. He brought together a workforce housing task force, which Kaniksu Land Trust got to be a part of, and to start having some of these conversations. And as these conversations went on, our organization, the individuals that are within it, the people that support us, we started having these conversations too on where does Kaniksu Land Trust fit into this, do we fit into this conversation? And we really felt like, even though most people would think about KLT and say, wait, aren't you conserving land? You're not in the conversation of development. We're very much in the conversation. We should very much be in the conversation of development, because if we do not do the work in balancing people and the environment, then we're not doing that work, that community work that is so important to us at Kaniksu Land Trust. So take, for instance, I use this analogy a lot. If we have somebody coming to town, or we have somebody looking for housing and they can't find anything affordable close in where they can be a part of the community, then maybe what makes sense for them is to move 20 miles up the road north towards Bonner's Ferry, buy 5 acres, and begin to fragment the landscape. So that's when the conversation really becomes part of this conservation conversation too. How do we help support keeping people close into their communities, an active part of their communities, and therefore at the same time period, making sure that that conservation, the landscape, those qualities that we all either decided to continue to live here for, or people decided to move here for, how do we keep those qualities intact? And part of that, keeping that intact, is keeping that landscape, the beautiful landscape that we all know and we all enjoy. So that's how we came to be a part of the conversation, and we really felt that in looking at community land trusts, and I've fortunately had an experience to see many across the Pacific Northwest, felt like this is one of the really good tools in a toolbox in order to help support our town.
That's the perfect segue. I was just going to ask Michael if you could explain how a community land trust is one of the solutions to this problem. And I did want to just mention that we are going to open this up for questions. So we're going to talk for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and then if you do have questions, we will take your questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Katie and Kaniksu Land Trust and you all for inviting me here. I live in Bozeman. It was a lovely drive up this morning, so thank you so much. That's not the only good part of it, but I enjoyed that as well. So let me key off.
Just for the back, for the folks in the back.
I have to hold it
Oh,
closer.
there we
Yes,
go.
please. Thank you.
Clearly not done enough karaoke recently. But that will happen before the hour's over. No, it will not. So let me key off from what Katie said. You don't need me to talk about the needs in your community, but I think we should just sort of acknowledge what's happening, regardless of what's driving. This is true in communities across the country, but it's especially true in western mountain communities with all these wonderful amenities, mountains and ski resorts and hiking and all the rest. And you all have a lake too.
I know, double
Jealous. So what we know is, as Katie said, and you all know, housing is expensive and it's getting more expensive. And there's sort of both a vertical and a horizontal impact to that. One is that those numbers keep getting bigger, the gaps between what people who work in this community can afford. And then the second thing is more and more people as these numbers get bigger, more and more people are falling into those categories. And so the Community Land Trust model and movement sort of argues if we're going to assemble somehow, if we're going to cobble together the resources to make a home or many homes affordable, maybe we should think about how to leverage the impact and benefit of those resources to help multiple households. So let me use a quick example, and I'm going to use numbers that I'm sure don't work here. They're certainly not true in Bozeman. But let's say the cost of housing is $200,000 to buy a single family home. And I can afford $140,000 based upon my income. So I've got a $60,000 gap. There are some really many well-intentioned programs that are out there that say, all right, we can figure out a way somehow, public, private sector, there's a variety of strategies, we can talk a bit about what those are, but let's say we bridge that gap. If you provide that assistance to me, as one of the workers in your community, as a gift, then it helps me. But without any restrictions on what happens if I ever decide to leave, there's two outcomes. One is that I pocket that $60,000, which is terrific for me, and the home sells at a market rate price. So you've lost the subsidy, and now you've got even greater problem because housing values continue to go up. So community land trusts are, at their very core, they do a lot of things I think particularly well, but at their very core are a strategy that says if we make housing affordable, let's keep it affordable from one occupant to the next. And I'll talk a little bit about it. Is this okay? Can I just go ahead?
Right.
So I'll talk, don't worry, I don't have, well I have a few slides, but I don't know that I'm going to use them. So we start there. We start with I'll back up one step further. The only way we're going to be able to address the crisis of housing affordability is to bring resources together. There is no magic wand. So if any of you are thinking hopefully the Community Land Trust would be that, it's not. What it does do is say if we can put those resources together, we can maximize the benefit for the long-term benefit, not only the people who live there, but for the community itself. So all of this is situated within an organization, a local organization that can be within a single municipality, it can be countywide, it can be multi-county, it could be and our experience has been that candidly, having city governments run these programs has not been terribly effective, and it's not the fault of city governments, it's just that city governments and county governments are political creatures subject to the electoral process. So priorities change over time. That's not a bad thing, but if we're going to commit to permanent affordability, we need to pay attention to making sure we've got the resources and capacity to do that. It does not need to be a brand new nonprofit. Many community land trusts, about 300 community land trusts operating across the country. There's one in Ketchum, here in Idaho. I'm working with one in Bozeman. There's a half a dozen in Montana. They're scattered kind of all across the United States. So sometimes these are brand new nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 charitable organizations that are set up. Other times existing organizations, which I think is one of the issues on the table, say, you know what, if we're going to do this together, that's the decision of the community. Rather than create yet another nonprofit, let's adapt the principles and practices of permanent housing affordability to an existing organization. That's a decision that you all get to make. We'll come back and talk a little bit about organizations a bit. So what community land trusts do different than most affordable housing programs out there is instead of providing the assistance to individual homeowners, home buyer households, We'll talk homeownership first. We can talk about rental variations. Instead of giving them a gift of money, we're going to use whatever resource we can to write down the purchase price. We're going to lock that subsidy into the unit. And the mechanism that we use to make sure that that happens, it used to be extremely rare. It's still sort of non-traditional, but it's very effective. So the way it works is I'll go back to my $200,000 example, $140,000 I can afford, $60,000 gap. Instead of giving me a loan or a grant of $60,000, the Community Land Trust writes down the purchase price by that $60,000. Okay, with me so far? Right? And in order to control the future use and disposition of the property over time from one owner-occupant to the next, at closing, the home buyer household that's selected, based upon whatever the community priorities are in terms of eligibility and qualification, purchases the home at closing. The title to the home and all improvements are recorded in their name, but the Community Land Trust entity, however that's structured, retains the ownership of the lot on which that home is located and leases that parcel of land on which the home is located and the yard that's associated, leases it to that home buyer household at closing by means of a long-term lease. In Montana, for some reason, we're limited to do that for 75 years, but I'm thinking in Idaho, 99 here, you can do it in 99 years. So like other states around the country, the lease is for an initial term of 99 years, it's inheritable, and it's renewable at the end of the first 99-year term for a second 99-year term. So it provides that homeowner with all the rights as if they owned it, except any rights that might be modified in the lease agreement itself. And this, I want to be clear, this lease agreement is in place so that should that homeowner ever decide to sell, the community organization on behalf of the community it serves can make sure that this opportunity is available for another household that's in the same income range. So this ground lease agreement serves a twofold purpose. One is it's a legal instrument that's executed at closing. It's recorded in the county land records as a durable, enforceable, legally binding right to use and occupy that piece of property. And the second is it defines the terms and expectations. So in exchange for this hypothetical example that I keep using of my receiving $60,000 of assistance to purchase this home I would otherwise not be able to afford, what is your community's expectations regarding my occupancy of the home that I own and the land that I lease, the use of that home and land, and what happens when we set a transfer? And those decisions in the ground lease get to be made by the local community. It may be very different than what we're doing in Bozeman, which is different than what's happening in Pittsburgh, which is different than what's happening in Sarasota, because your needs and your community priorities are different. The kinds of things we typically see in the lease are, you need to take care of your house. You're responsible for your visitors and guests and your family members, just like any other homeowner in this community. You need to pay the taxes on the home you own and the land you lease. You need to keep it insured at specified limits because if it burns down, we want to make sure that it can be replaced. Really common sense stuff. They're also, in the case of many community land trusts, they take a couple of decisions a bit further and say things like, you can make capital improvements after you move in, but we want to see what you're doing. We want to give you permission before you do that because we just want to make sure that what you're doing is consistent with local codes and ordinances, but it's also, because you care about this asset after I leave, you want to make sure that this is done in an appropriate manner, that I've got the money to pay for it, all the rest of that kind of stuff. So, I'll jump to we'll come back to this, but I'll jump to what we're doing in Bozeman. We made a decision that these are owner-occupied homes, and we're putting a whole lot more subsidy than $60,000 into them. So we're requiring owner occupancy. If I buy a community land trust home, I live in it as my primary residence. It's not an Airbnb. It's not a VRBO because that's tearing up Bozeman. I don't know what it's here, right? And what we're doing is a trade-off between the opportunity to purchase at a price that I can afford, balanced against wanting to protect this asset for the long-term benefit of the community. Central to most community land trust ground lease agreements, certainly those who are operating in expensive markets like yours and the one I come from, there's also a restriction on resale. We allow this to be passed along to heirs, but in the event of a resale, the process is controlled by the community land trust organization on behalf of the community, and a decision is made about how much equity, how much appreciation does the homeowner get at the time of sale, and how much do we want to limit that in order to keep the home affordable to the next buyer. If I didn't have a microphone in my hand, I'd spread both of my hands out to my side and say, what we're really trying to do is to navigate two equally important and directly competing goals. On the one hand, wanting to provide a fair and equitable return for the seller, because one of the rights of ownership is the ability to build equity. Those of us who own homes are lucky enough to know that. But at the same time, we're also interested in and committed to keeping the price affordable to the next buyer without having to bring a whole lot more subsidies back into the deal. And that, my friends, is a teeter-totter. It's a seesaw. So you get to decide however you want to do that. So then so the homeowner can live there the rest of their lives, they can pass along to their kids can pass along to their kids, and so on down the line. But if they choose to sell, the CLT organization, however structured, arranges for the sale for the outgoing seller and the incoming buyer, and then starts that whole process all over again for the next 198 years. So that's the commitment we're making to those homeowner households, to future homeowner households, homebuyer households that we've met in the community in which the community land trust is operating, as well as those sources of resources that made this home initially affordable in the first place. And the last thing I'll say before passing it along is, because there are other good things to be heard here, is all of this, as I said several times, is situated within an organization, but one that has a commitment to develop and retain the capacity that's needed to do the ongoing stewardship related to that home. So I just hired with Headwaters Community Housing Trust in Bozeman a part-time, this will become a full-time position before long, stewardship manager. She's terrific. She's helping with the influx of people that are interested in buying the homes, and after they move in, she's going to continue these ongoing relationships, not about intrusion, not about running people's lives, but just staying in contact and making sure that the rules are being followed, because there are serious implications if I'm not paying my real estate taxes for me, but also for the community land trust. So part of it's monitoring and enforcement, but mostly it's about just staying in contact and being able, should we need to step in and provide assistance or resources or referrals to help people in the event they come into difficulty. And then, as I said before, then getting to the point where somebody says, all right, it's time for me to move on, then managing that transfer of ownership and starting the process all over again. So I think I'll stop here and then turn it over back to you, Lisa.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Did you have an example that you wanted to share with us? You have a project that you recently did. Would now be a good time to share that? I am going to turn over to Erik to talk about Ponderay.
I could do that now or later. I'll do it now.
Let's do that right now.
Want to see a project?
And then
we
we'll
don't call it a project.
talk about the implications of Ponderay.
All right, thank you. Welcome to Headwaters Community Housing Trust. We're a nonprofit 501c3, and in this case, we were We were created as a new nonprofit for a number of reasons. Let me get this set up. And our first project is Bridgeview. There's a long and rich history about this particular neighborhood, but this is a site, right, for those of you who are familiar with Bozeman, Montana, sorry about this. It's immediately next door to the Story Mill Community Park. This used to be a mobile home park. 92 trailers were moved off of this in the early 2000s when a big-time developer moved everybody out to do a really high-end development here, and then when the recession hit, went bankrupt. So, abbreviating a long story, the Trust for Public Land, a private benefactor, bought this. TPL, Trust for Public Land, developed the park. So this 8 acres was set aside. Bridgeview is a 62-home, owner-occupied development. This is on the northeast side of Bozeman. The top there is Bridger Drive that goes up to Bridger Bowl. We're building 62 smaller homes on smaller lots because that's not typical of what's going on, and part of that's also we pay for construction by the square foot. We pay for land by the square foot as well. These are also exceptionally high energy efficient homes. Actually, they're net zero energy ready, because what we're also trying to model is that we live in a place where we just can't assume that resources are limitless. When we need to create uses for new water. We're not making judgments about the other kind of development that's going on. We're simply saying there's a different way to do it. This road here down on the bottom southern border there, Hillside Lane, is a city-wide street, 60 feet. Everything else inside the neighborhood is 30, all the streets are 30 feet wide. We can get emergency vehicles down there, but we're trying to model a different kind of development. Germane to this conversation, half of the homes, they are a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom homes. Half of the homes are going to be sold at market rate prices. We're working with a local realty company. Quite frankly, we've told them to sell them for as much money as we can, because the other 31 homes, identical, indistinguishable, scattered throughout the neighborhood, we're pricing at half their market value, roughly, actually slightly below market value. And our target clientele in this case are households with incomes above 80% of area median income, which is the cutoff for 80% of median income. For those of you who don't know, is the federal definition of low income. And it isn't that we don't care about low-income households. There are other opportunities that are available. There's never enough resources. But the unmet niche that we have in our community are people that earn too much to qualify for any available federal or state housing affordability assistance, but not nearly enough to be able to buy a home of their own. So we're serving what we were referring to as the missing middle. So these homes are going to be, the market rate homes will be sold fee simple, as any other fee simple transaction. In our case, with the community housing trust, homes that will be sold to eligible middle income buyers, will be selling those subject to a ground lease agreement.
So now from a city government perspective, Erik, can you talk a little bit about how this might work in Ponderay?
Primarily, I came here to learn, but one thing that I would say is, in some sense, I'm an expert in the area of being priced out of places. I was priced out of Jackson, Wyoming, and then I moved to Seattle. I was priced out of there, and then moved here and got in just a little bit ahead of the curve, and I'm extremely grateful. And so I guess I'm a bit of an expert in that. But one of the ways that we can make things more affordable, when we talk about this gap's getting bigger over time, is add more rungs to the ladder or slice it thinner. And maybe when you sit here, if you have a house, you're like, okay, how big should a lot be? You might come up with 7,100 square feet. But if you don't have a place, this was me in Seattle, I lived in an ADU, and 800 square feet, that's exactly what I wanted for my starter home. And they weren't making any. They were making 2,500 square foot homes if I was willing to drive an hour each way into the city and back out. And so that was before I became a planner, but it's part of my story. And so when I see this kind of thing, by taking the land out of the equation, that's one of the ways you can slice it thinner, right? In the same way, if you take a lot and you make it a little smaller, you make room for another home. By taking the land out of the equation, you slice it thinner. And so Ponderay, sorry, I've got a bit of a rough voice here today. But in Ponderay, our story is we were a mill town. Effectively, there was an old smelter there. It operated for 2 years on the lake shore around 1910, 1912. And then this was a company town. The smelter went belly up. So we had blocks and blocks and blocks of platted lots where we might have had 1 or 2 homes on all of those lots, and they were basically a garden lot situation. We became a bedroom community for about 70 years, and there was no problem, no harm, no foul. Our streets were dirt, so the maintenance costs were not that high. Then we come to Ponderay. That many of you know Ponderay as the place where the big box stores are, right? So there's a period of time where, because of our location, we ended up with a lot of square feet of retail. And interestingly, none of those included housing. If you look historically at how we build communities, we used to put housing everywhere. It was pretty much 1 for 1. If you had a business downstairs, you had a house upstairs, and as your community grew, this was Sandpoint in 1925, now all of a sudden maybe we're going to 3 stories. So we're going more than 2 to 1. But so for Ponderay, we kind of got behind when it comes to housing in general. And the other thing about Ponderay is we have a lot of service sector jobs. They don't pay very well. So that combination is something that is really, really noticeable in our community. But what's happened lately in the last, I would say, probably 5 years, all of these commercial lots that were available for commercial square footage have started to become more marketable and valuable for multifamily residents. And this is something that the city has had fairly, I would say, flexible ordinances for a long time, but it was the market kind of shifting to people need a place to live that started to bring this stuff to the forefront. So in the last couple of years, we have, let's see, in terms of new developments, we have 78 units that is being built right now. 62 units were approved, 18 units were approved, that's 158. Multifamily, we've got market rate, 114 units, 96 units, 12 units, 16 units. And a lot of you are familiar with the Schweitzer partnership, and they are adding 84 units, which is employer supported, and that's 322. Well, at 2.2 people per residential unit, that's 141 new people. That will double our population in the next 5 years if all of this builds out. So we'll double. We will be, by population, probably the fastest growing city in Idaho. So things are happening in Ponderay, and a lot of it is infill. That means it's on areas where we have existing sewer, we have existing water, we have existing streets. And infrastructure is one of the things that I want to talk about. I think it's one of the things the community wants to talk to our cities about, is that infrastructure costs and the time cost and the regulatory costs, and ways that we can work together. But I'll turn the mic back over, but that's kind of a summary of where we are.
Okay, great. And we'll get back there. We'll get back to that if we have time. But what I would love to do right now, I know we have a lot of probably questions in the audience. I see a lot of big employers and a lot of stakeholders in the community. Phil, here, let me get the mic so that you get on.
Thank you, and I want to thank all the panelists. And a great presentation about the opportunity that's being created in Bozeman, and I think could be created here. It makes me think that this model may not be exclusively the domain of land trusts. The state of Idaho, for instance, has managed land, at least cabins at Priest Lake, of course, a business they may be trying to get out of. But is there any particular reason that other jurisdictions, whether it's the state, the city, the county, couldn't also acquire land and manage them under some form of public trust with a similar procedure?
Of course, I don't think we should ever rule any out. We should not rule out any possibilities. What I do know is that whoever is in some ways, who's the owner of the land is not nearly as important as who's taking responsibility for sort of making sure this all works over time. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of work to create a home that's priced below market. There's an entire industry out there who knows that. I think the real work, without question, the contributions that we make is kind of sticking with the deal, sticking with the homeowners, caring about this home as a community asset. That's why we're placing it in trust. So there are examples where there are public sector entities, because of their ability to acquire land, that decide that they're also going to be the landowner and lessor. I think that the only thing that really merits thinking through is, can city staff be that stewardship staffing that's needed for this to work successfully over time, or should there be some sort of a contractual arrangement between the city and some provider to make sure that that gets done? There have been some failures of community land trusts. I've been doing this work for 2 years now. And we've seen some failures, not many recently. This was kind of in the old days when we weren't really planning organizations. We were saying, well, let's give this a try. But the ones that have really struggled are the organizations that don't make that commitment. We talk about permanent affordability, but we have to make sure that we've got the resources that are there. So I think suggesting other alternatives, you get to do it however you want.
Can I ask Michael a question? Because I actually know the answer to this, but I'd like him to talk about it. I think it's really fascinating. I think these guys, everybody would be really interested in hearing about how Bozeman and Headwaters Community Housing Trust has formed their lottery system and how related to the community that is. I love that.
Sure. Partly because I sat all the way up here, and I just don't stand if that works. So we know that, and again, we're talking home ownership here, that any community land trust that launches, one of the critical pieces is to make sure you're very clear about who you're trying to serve, who's your target clientele, and how best to do that. So we went through, we've got a great board. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit, we're a tax-exempt organization. And we went through a long deliberation on who should these homes be affordable to. We knew our niche was that 80 to 120, which is now almost 150% of AMI, because our median home prices, I don't know if they are here, they're $860,000. Separate topic. So we've developed a two-part home buyer selection policy. The two parts are, one is what are the threshold eligibility requirements that must be met in order to be considered for homeownership, and then the second part is how are we going to select. Given that right now we have 31. Our long-term plan is to do more than 31, but right now we've got this particular development to be completed over 3 phases. So in our eligibility criteria, and this is all posted on our website if you want to take a look at it, it's headwatershousing.org. We said that what we would expect, incomes below 120%, enough creditworthiness and income to qualify for the mortgage. We made a decision not to strip people of their assets. We don't assume that people are going to have a lot of liquid assets. We're talking about not retirement assets, but other kinds of cash assets that they might have. But a lot of affordable housing programs say, when you're done, we want you to put as much of that money as we can, as we were going to require you to keep very little in the checkbook after you buy the home, and we're not doing that. Because we'd like to reinforce appropriate behavior and allow people that have those sorts of cushions to be able to keep them. We capped it at $105,000. They've got to be an adult. We're matching the size of the household to the size of the home in terms of number of bedrooms. Minimum 1 person to buy a 1-bedroom, minimum of 2 people to buy a 2-bedroom, minimum of 3 to buy a 3-bedroom. And then because we've got such a critical need for housing for our essential workforce, school teachers and cops and shop owners, the same things that you're seeing, I'm sure, as well. We decided to make it a threshold criteria that 75% of your household income has to come locally. And we basically defined that, and for those of you familiar with the geography, Bozeman to Belgrade down to Four Corners. It's a pretty narrow prescribed area, because we're the economic hub. That's where a lot of people are commuting to work. And so we're not anti-growth, but we're not creating housing for people that want to move there because they want to live there and they're doing their work virtually. And that's a bit controversial, but we're pleased with it, and people seem to be really respectful of it. So those are the eligibility criteria. Now, how do we select from amongst the pool of equally eligible households? So we posted online an entry form where people at this stage, we're not asking for tax returns, we're not asking for pay stubs and all the rest of that. We're taking people at their word. They fill out the online entry form and they submit that. That opened up on June 22nd, actually June 1st, it ends on June 22nd. We're going to take all of those at that point, and in this entry form, people can indicate the home they're interested in buying. And if they're a 1-person household, say they want to buy the 3-bedroom, the online form says nope. It says it politely, but basically we're trying to create these sort of sideboards. But in order, again, when we do the drawing in late November for the first 11 homes, in order to target households already living there, we drew a 50-mile radius around the city of Bozeman because that's our commuting distance. And we said if you live within that, you can apply from being anywhere, but if you live within that radius, if you've lived here 2 years or more, if you lived here 2 years prior to your entry, you get 4 entries. 3 years, you get 6 entries. 4 years, you get 8 entries. 5 or more years, you get 10. So what we're really, and that's for each one of the homes for which you've signed up for. So we're trying to load this towards the likelihood that more people who are already living and working here are going to be selected through that process. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
I do.
Okay.
So in terms of the stewardship, let's say the person who's establishing these relationships with the homeowners becomes aware that they haven't paid their property taxes. What is the consequence to those kind of things that might violate whatever rules are set up for this particular trust?
So if you didn't hear in the back, the question is, what are the consequences if you violate the rules and the criteria?
Well, as a legal instrument, the lease makes it clear not only what the requirements are, but gives us as the landowner and lessor the ability to declare default on the lease. Which means we can begin removing somebody from their home. It's got to be a pretty drastic situation in order to do that, so that's why we're maintaining contact, because the question was, what if somebody doesn't pay their property taxes? We're probably going to know that before they get to the point that the taxes are due, because we usually can predict, we can tell how well people are doing. But in the event that they don't, and we've got a system that's set up, there's a Salesforce application called Homekeeper, and so this is all going to be automated in addition to the people side of this. So if we get to the point where it's a couple of days before the taxes are due, the taxes are not paid, we'll pay the taxes so that we don't lose the property to a tax sale from the county, and then we'll add that fee back to the homeowner to pay us back over time, and if they don't, then we'll begin proceedings to move them out. I mean, we're trying to do everything we possibly can to make the rules clear, to provide tremendous benefit, allow them to have access to resources if they don't behave. So if there's repeated violation or egregious violation of the ground lease, it doesn't happen very much in the community land trust world, I can tell you honestly. We've been doing this a long time, we've worked across the country. I think you said 15 years because that's on the website. We haven't updated a long time. It's been a lot longer than that. Not your fault, our fault. But we've seen very, very few instances of people saying, no, I got $300,000 to help me buy this home, but I'm not going to pay attention to the rules. But we need to monitor that to make sure that it happens. That's your question?
Yes.
Yes, I'm coming back.
Yes, can you hear me? It's Rob Hart, Executive Director of Bonner Community Housing Agency. Have you run into any problems with fair housing in Montana like we have here in Idaho when you talk about the types of criteria you have for buyers related to getting where they live in terms of the radius, how many years they've worked there? Have you run into any kind of discrimination?
We have not, and we've made sure that we talked with our really expensive attorneys to kind of double check us on that one. So and what we're also doing at the same time is we're very clearly doing a lot of outreach to BIPOC communities and to folks that would show up on that fair housing arrangement. Bozeman is not a very diverse community, but we're really kind of trying to make sure that we're going out there. So as long as we're not establishing criteria that directly violate access or rights of protected classes, we seem to be okay.
Well, if you require that the income be earned, if you have somebody who's senior
Oh,
or disabled, then then that's what we run into here, is that we want to just sell affordable housing to employees, but the fair housing says, no, you have to include seniors and disabled, because the disabled can't work, and seniors may not work.
I really appreciate your clarification. And so while we talk about local working, we assume that people that are on retirement income or fixed income, that's local. We're regarding it that way. So we're not being exclusive of households on fixed income or retired. We also made a decision at the same time that you heard me talk about 2 years you get 4 entries, so on up, and we decided to limit it at 5 years or more to get 10, because we don't want the entire neighborhood to be people my age. People live there 60 years and they get 240 entries. But anyway, I didn't mean to be dismissive of your question. I think we have to play by the rules. Absolutely. I'm really glad you clarified that. Thank you.
So Thank you. Coming from a financing background, you say we have to play by the rules. I would submit that there are people that have tested whether you have to play by the rules or not, i.e. your VRBO situation. Somebody gets that bit in their teeth, and you can't physically stop them. But I'm wondering about the foreclosure default laws state by state, and I'm sure you've experienced this. Are they sufficient to have those kinds of reasons and use allow the foreclosure and maintain the integrity of the land trust?
Sure, great questions. So a couple things. First of all, in Bridgeview, we made what could prove to be a big controversial decision, but we put in the declarations. We had to get a plan unit development approved for all of that because we had 19 variations on city code. It took us a long time and a lot of money to work through all that. No disrespect meant to cities, it's just they do things the way they've been doing them. We had to develop the homeowner association declarations for all 62 homeowners, the 31 market rate, the 32 below market rate. We looked at the possibility of seeing if we could require the market rate homeowners to live there as their primary residence, and that got into sort of turbulent legal waters. But what we did specify in the declarations is no renting by any homeowners, temporary or long-term. That's a violation of the recorded declarations. Could there be circumstances when market rate homeowners violate that? Of course, but we're going to try and get a healthy. We're also really trying to. This is going to sound a little bit philosophical, but we really made a very deliberate decision in our case to develop a neighborhood as opposed to a subdivision, right? Where we're trying to explain that this is not just kind of don't expect to just buy this home. For example, some of our garages, partly because of the nature of the constraints of the site, but also by intention, most of the garages are not attached. You have to walk 30 yards to your garage. We hope that sort of fosters interaction. And there may be some people that look at that that don't like that. To your case, the way the ground lease reads is we have the right to declare a default for default on the ground lease. It's got to be fairly significant before we do that. We've also got an agreement with the lending community that we cannot declare that default on the ground lease without A, notifying the holder of the note, and B, giving them cure provisions. The handful of ground lease defaults that we've seen over the years, and it really has been, it's probably bigger than a handful, but under 20 that we've seen across the country in the last 20 years, when we know that in the situation where the CLT has notified the holder of the note, saying, we've got to get rid of this person. They said, fine with us, we're already in foreclosure on the mortgage. So typically it's the foreclosure on the mortgage that becomes the enforcing instrument, just because of circumstances.
We just have about 10 more minutes until we're going to move into roundtable discussions, and we're going to move over to Susan.
I guess this could be a question for either Erik or any of the panelists, but I'm curious about what kind of land is good for this, and what would be helpful in terms of land use codes, or if there are any particular, I don't know, policies that cities or counties could implement that could help with this kind of community land trust situation. And please hold the microphone close to your mouth so we can hear you better back here. Thank you.
I don't have all the answers to this, but I do know that close in is important, transportation is important, and city services is very important to make this work.
So I will start, but I had a similar question for Michael, so maybe I can pass it to him for his side of it. We had a similar group a few years back in this room, and folks with United Way talked about ALICE, which is kind of low-income working families. And one of the things on their chart noted the typical transportation costs was about $700 a month. Typical housing cost was about $700 a month. So when we think about housing, it's important to think about location in and kind of a holistic problem solving, because to Katie's example, someone has to go to Bonners Ferry to find affordable housing, even though they work here. That doesn't really help their family's bottom line. So what are cities doing about it? To me, to address the question specifically is existing infrastructure, because infrastructure is so expensive, and I think it probably gets more expensive every time we build something per linear foot of sewer, water, etc. There's just a whole lot of costs to go into that. So when we can be an existing services, that's something everyone needs to keep that in their mind, is that's really important to the equation. My belief as part of the solution is for cities to kind of enable neighborhood plans so that someone can come with a solution that is either creating a new neighborhood or a pocket neighborhood or a building block of a neighborhood. And it's something that we could look at the whole package instead of going line by line and back and forth in 19 different amendments. So I want to hear what we could do to make that slicker.
There's a couple of parts to the answer and the question. So the decision about what kind of land, I think, is really a local decision. I think a lot of community land trusts, certainly the case for Headwaters Community Housing Trust. By the way, we selected the name, the founders of this organization, the initial board, selected the name Headwaters to situate the organization geographically without locking it into a specific set of municipal boundaries. And we've got a terrific land trust there, the Gal Valley Land Trust. We just didn't want to confuse people about it, right? So that's why we call ourselves a community housing trust. In our case, we do care about transportation. We do care about limited resources, and so we've developed an internal policy. I've already had a couple of developers call me and say, we'd like to talk about this, and of course I'm sitting down with them. But in one case, and I'll leave this anonymous, this particular developer had an idea for a piece of land out in the county pretty far away, and we said no, because first of all, there's no public services there, and the other is we're sort of exacerbating this challenge of people having to commute long distances towards their housing. Commute long distances from where they live into where they work. Your question was, Eric, was?
I think the big question
for me
is what can we do to make that easier?
Yeah, I'll tell you that, no, this is a great question. So March 22nd of 2020, the City Commission unanimously in a Zoom meeting at 11:45 p.m. made a motion to approve the PUD. I was watching online. And the way it works in our community is the City Commission, whoever is the commissioner that forwards the motion, then says something. And in this case, it's now the mayor-elect. And I thought he said something really interesting, because he said, wow, my words, not his, but it's mixed income, it's in town, it's compact design, it's energy efficiency, it's permanent affordability. What more could you ask? And I thought that was really a nice compliment. I thought what he said next was equally important. He said, we should make this, meaning sort of that bundle of goodies that are in there, we should make this off the shelf as opposed to something. And we spent probably $1.5 million just navigating to get the PUD. This is not a blaming statement. We understand why they're there. But to that point, the city is actually beginning to redesign their engineering code. Our argument was, we understand all the reasons for code, but 60-foot roadways, we need to get emergency vehicles down our streets, and we can. But my argument was, and I hope this doesn't get in the paper or something, but my point is, why are we designing neighborhoods around garbage trucks? Right? So what we've got is 3 areas. We can get emergency vehicles down. The fire chief, the police department, they've all signed off on it. Public safety's all signed off on it. But they've got 3 places where we're collecting garbage and recycling. So part of what we're going to be doing in our marketing is, if you want one of those stinky plastic things that you roll out the end of your driveway, not here. So, but where I'm going with this is, I think that there are things that we can do, because it's very complicated and it becomes even more expensive. Again, I want to be careful with elected officials and city officials here in the room, I'm not being critical, but I think the quid pro quo is affordability. Has to be a part of that mix, you know? If we make it off the shelf for everybody, then I think in some ways we have the potential for this thing to just kind of promote more market rate housing, right? And what we're concerned about, it's interesting you're from Jackson, you know, it's my sort of internal thinking, and I want to be very careful about this. Humility is a really high value for our organization and for me, but if we don't do something different in the community that we live in, we're going to become Jackson, and Jackson's become Aspen. I was talking to somebody today who's been advising us on this project, and she said her next door neighbor, she lives in Jackson, just outside of Jackson, she said her next door neighbor is looking to rent their home for $65,000 a month. That's a true story. So I'm not trying to scare people, all the rest of that, but I think we've become a community. We just added an elementary school teacher, elementary school principal to our board. He's very busy, he's really excited, he's a terrific guy. He said, here's why I'm on it. We get teachers coming for 2 or 3 years, they sort of eke it out, and think, I can't stay. That's no way to run a school district. Not my words, his words. So that's really what we're trying to do. Sorry, a little bit of street preaching there, hope that was helpful.
Always helpful. Thank you. So our objective today was to get this conversation started and to present the idea of the Community Land Trust as one solution to the workforce housing shortage. I'm going to segue over to the roundtables. Good for that? Okay. So now, even though we could go on, and I still want to hear about infrastructure, and there's like so much more. Again, we've just started the conversation. And Liz Wargo, right here, U of I professor, is going to lead us in the next phase. Just want to give you a little bit of context that identifying and better understanding challenges is the work necessary to enact sustainable solutions that make sense for our community. This is collective work, which Liz labels as a wicked problem. Liz is helping, she is no stranger to helping groups solve wicked problems. Most of the time she devotes her energies to helping education systems change in ways that support awesome learning that matters for rural communities. But today, she's going to lead us through a simple but powerful framework so we can reflect, connect, and surface next steps necessary for us to enact and support the next phases of our work. Thank you very much, Liz.
First, I'm super grateful because wicked challenges are not solved alone. And I don't know about you, but when I was sitting there, I heard these very knowledgeable folks express humility and curiosity, right? Multiple times, I don't know, or this is what we figured out at whatever time you said on Zoom, right? Adaptive challenges are novel, there is no recipe, and again, they can't be created in isolation if they're going to sustain. So the work that I hear these folks talking about is the future preservation of our communities, right? So now I'm going to make you work. It's okay. I think you'll have fun. So first, you need to understand that every single person in this room's brain, we need them. Because this is a wicked challenge, right? So I need to have each and every one of you promise 2 things. 1, that you will share what you're thinking. And 2, that you will encourage others to share what you're thinking. What they're thinking. So that means respectful dialogue. That means if somebody at your table hasn't spoken, trying to make room for that. Like, hey, I haven't heard you, Carol, speak yet. Do you have any thoughts? Right? Not necessarily dominating the talk time, because we don't have that long. And again, this is a wicked challenge we need everybody's brain. Okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to make your thinking visible. So how we're going to do that is, in just a second, you're going to get a piece of paper that will be stuck in the middle of your table. You should have a writing utensil. So if somebody can volunteer to just capture the conversation in 4 buckets. It's pretty simple, but we'll stick this up high so you can see it as well. Positive things that you're thinking about. What are the opportunities associated with a community land trust? Or whatever solution, again, novel to this wicked problem is right for our community. What are some of the challenges? It's good to note these, but we probably know a lot of them, right? So what I would also encourage you to do, besides making sure that you step up and share your ideas and really truly listen to others, is that you don't dwell on this challenges thing. We can do this. Ideas spurred, just like random ideas. Don't let them surface and then go away. Even if you're like, I don't know how this would work. Ideas and then questions. So 4 quadrants, 1 note taker, 10 minutes at the group that you're at, and then I'll give you the next instruction. Any questions? Okay.
So if the goal is affordability, and we have limited land.
But what I heard you say
And if you've been paying rent, you get nothing for any of that. Even if this just stays level.
So again, quickly figure out who woke up the latest. They're going to take the pen and stay behind. Everybody else, find one last group.
45 is lazy. Challenges was the big
I want you to plant an appointment with yourself in the future to do something about this. We need to keep this work moving forward. Okay, so you're nodding your head. Now make an appointment. Go right now. Quick, I'll give you a minute. Make an appointment with yourself to do something about this. And maybe you just write down, I'm going to do something about this. And maybe be a little more descriptive about this. But if you have a specific action, that's even better.
Where's a really good summary about this community trust land?
I would answer that question because that's actually how I found this fellow, is through the Burlington Associates website, which has an immense amount of resources regarding this question and examples, and it's just a treasure trove of information. So it's burlingtonassociates.org.com, Burlington like Burlington, Vermont, associates.com. So spend some time looking through that website and you're going to learn a great deal.
Great. Do you have a 30-second parting thing, or is that your parting thing?
Oh, parting thing, 30 seconds. I'll take this to just say, ish. Okay. This was amazing. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving your afternoon to this conversation, to see so many people out, so many organizations, businesses, individuals, thought leaders represented here. We could have only had this conversation by you making the choice to come here. And we know, just like Michael said, these wicked problems are solved when we come together as a community, figure out what makes our challenges unique, and then how those unique challenges need unique solutions. So I'm just really grateful to see you all here, and I'm excited to continue this conversation with each of you.
This is quite impressive, to have this many people recognizing this is a problem and a challenge, but also an opportunity. I think of housing affordability. It's kind of an elusive term. We've decided in Bozeman to refer to the homes that we're doing as below market because we're trying to stay away from conversation. We're going to have some people saying our homes are not affordable enough. We understand that. But housing, the issue of having a place to live, we all know what that means, those of us who have it, we know what it means for people that don't have it. But I think this issue is both one of social justice and fairness, but it's also one of economic vitality. And I think if we sort of take a look at it from the lens, Dave and I were talking about this, and I said, this community land trust strategy, and maybe it's not what you want to do. And it's not, we started this way, it's not going to solve all the problems. But by making the argument that if we're going to make a home, a single home, or many homes affordable, we want to keep that off the market and targeted to households who really need it in our community, that's both a socially progressive and fiscally conservative idea. So I think we just need to kind of claim the dialogue on this and create opportunities where they're not before. And I think it's easy for us, what I'll say in closing, I think it's easy for us to take a look at the immensity of it and go, there's not that much we can do. There isn't until we start trying to do something about it. And I think that's where the real changes come. So good on you that you're here. Thanks for having me be a part of this.
Thank you to Katie and the board and everyone at the Land Trust for the great work that you're doing. Please reach out if there are things you think we can do at the City of Ponderay or all of our cities. I don't think people realize how nimble cities, local governments can be, because we get put into this box of government, and really there's a place for solutions at the local level. So you gotta just all work together and make it happen. This is nice. Thank you.